Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Money and the Law. My FM 101.3 with your host, Jay Marsden from the Marsden Law Group, and I'm John Drohan from Main Effort Financial. We are joined once again by the Holliston Cable Access Television Programming Unit, Christian Bidet.
He's
here.
international desk, right? Is that what he's also?
He does.
Covers international.
Well, he
reporting?
does. He does. He's a war.
We have a war correspondent.
He's a war correspondent.
Nice.
He
Yeah,
does. He also does their e-news, their entertainment news, red carpet stuff.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, he does all that. He
Nice.
does.
What are you wearing? What are you wearing? Yes, that question. Hey, what's going on? Hey,
who are you wearing?
Oh, I'm
It's
sorry.
the
Who are you
question.
wearing? Who are you wearing? My bad.
Who are you wearing?
Yeah, my bad.
So, on Money in the Law, just to remind everybody, thank you for joining us, by the way. You are listening to two guys talk about some very, very important subjects. However, they frame it in such a way, and when I'm speaking in the third person because I'm one of those guys.
It's dense material, not the hosts are not dense. It's dense material.
It's dense presenters.
That's right.
But the way that we like to put it is we put it in sort of like the way that, our friends can understand, right?
Yeah, well, we have to really simplify it for some of our friends.
Right, some
Absolutely
of our friends,
right.
or our dear friends. We're not going to mention any of their names, but really just so people can, to put it in such a way that you can understand it and you can apply it to your regular life, to your normal life. And they're important, when you talk about, some finance things, they get deep, they get kind of bogged down in numbers and stuff. If we can put it in such a way where, we can simplify it and make it something that anybody can understand, then why not?
I just had an idea. I think one of the things that we don't highlight enough on the show is the fact that you can get information from a show, right? You can get information from all kinds of sources, right? That Google thing, I guess, apparently that's pretty popular these days.
Those guys know some stuff.
They're pretty smart. But it's not the accessing of the information or it's not the accessing of the knowledge. It's the application of the knowledge, right?
It's all about the application.
So I think that's what hopefully folks take away on a Saturday. They say to themselves, not only did I hear a lot of mumbo jumbo from those guys. Some of it made sense. Some of it sounded like they knew what they were talking about. But they presented it in such a way that it allows us them to apply the knowledge to some situation in their life. Hopefully they find it helpful.
And sometimes we will talk about things that, you may not be interested in. Sometimes we do. So sometimes there may be things that you're like, well, that doesn't really, if we talk about, retirement planning, and you're like, I'm 22 years old. Like I'm not, my retirement is 2 lifetimes away.
That's right.
There is always, we'll always bring, and we do this, we actually do this on purpose, believe it or not. It's almost like we knew what we were doing. But there will always be something that is what I like to term as universal application. So if we're talking about retirement planning and you're 22 years old, guess what? There's something that we're going to cover that if you listen to, and even if you retain 2% of it and you apply that, as I'm standing right here, I will guarantee that it will work out to your advantage a million years down the road.
Well, there's also a substantial number of things that we talk about that we have absolutely no authority whatsoever to discuss. We have no business discussing with any degree of, professional achievement, but we like to keep people on their toes and make them sort out what we're talking about is real. What we're talking about is pretend. It's helpful that way.
I will respectfully disagree with you.
You will?
Okay. So if we talk about, for instance, like what? Like if we talk about maybe pop music, like popular music, do you think we don't know what we're talking about?
Excellent point.
Right?
Excellent
if we
point.
talk about perhaps some
beer?
kind of pop.
I mean, I can't think of 2 greater experts. Maybe 1 or 2, but I think I think we all know our way around that subject pretty well.
You know what? I just had a flashback for our longtime listeners. As many of you remember, on Saturday mornings there was a portion of our show where we were in fact. We were very forthright in our beer expertise because we would do a beer review.
Well, it's a micro brew review. It wasn't a beer review. I mean, let's class it up a little bit. We're not sitting here talking about PBR.
Speaking of microbrew, how about the craft brews? Why are we not doing a show from there?
That's a great idea.
That is a great idea.
If you're listening, put that on your calendar. We're going to try to. We should reach out to those folks. And we should try to do a show.
We're going to reach out to those folks right after we're done with the show.
Actually, we're going to leave here. We're going to drive right to the brewery, and we're going to have some discussions.
If they're open,
it's going to be a work. It's going to be a work meeting.
A work meeting.
Before we dive in, real quick, I just want to give a shout out. I promised this person I would give a shout out. Not necessarily everybody within our listening area, but my state representative, one Carolyn Dykema. I happened to talk to her a couple of times this week about some issues that are going on from a legislative perspective. For those of you who don't know, I'm on the Board of Selectmen in Holliston. And I have to say that one of the challenges, when you're as a municipal official is, you always want to have somebody's ear on Beacon Hill to try to address some of these issues that come up in your own locality. And I have to give a shout out to Carolyn. She's always been a great resource, always willing to lend that ear about what's going on and help us in any way that she can. So I happened to talk to her on the way over. Told her I'd give her a shout out, and then she said, "Well, what's the shout out?" I said, "You got to listen on Saturday.
You got to listen on
you
Saturday.
You got to hear it on Saturday." So there's your shout out, Carolyn.
Yeah, and I will reiterate that shout out to Carolyn Dykema because
right.
she, you know what, she's awesome.
She's good people.
She's good people, and she's committed. I mean, as committed as anybody that I've ever met in her facility. In
government.
In that government, she is, and she's been doing it for a long time. She's done so much. It's like everywhere you look, Carolyn's there.
Well, not only that, but a real partner with not only our delegation in Holliston, but a real partner in other delegation, other members of the delegation in the Metro West area. They work really, really well together.
She knows what she's doing.
And there is a method to the madness, and she has helped us make sanity of it on more than one occasion. Yep. So that's my shout out.
So good for her. Good job.
Great job, Carolyn. Keep up the good work.
All right, so I texted you earlier before the show, and I wanted to. I was going to say, do you want to talk about the Blues Brothers, the movie, and just do a full show committed to that? And as much as I want to do that, maybe not today, but I do want to put that. I do want to table that for another time, and then I wanted to do a movie review. Not a movie, maybe a movie rock and roll review, because I saw. Have you seen Bohemian Rhapsody?
Oh no, but I was watching a different Queen documentary the other night. We'll put that on the table for later.
All right, so we'll table that as well, because there's some history that's been made with that making of that movie. Yeah. Because you've seen all those documentaries, like all those kind of the rock and roll documentary, and they're great, and they're realistic, and it's real video footage. You watch the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, and you're like, I don't need to watch any of those documentaries anymore. Yeah. This is better than the documentary. So so we'll table it. So then I said, let's see, Blues Brothers, Freddie Mercury, Bohemian Rhapsody, Second Amendment.
Oh, they all dovetail. They all dovetail.
And I don't know. I woke up today. I was having a conversation last night with my daughter, and we were talking about Second Amendment stuff. And I woke up today. I'm like, what? This is money and the law.
Yes.
Why can't the Second Amendment is part of our whole legal system? Why can't we talk about it? And again, in the beginning of the show, we said, we're going to talk about some things that, we sometimes we'll talk about things that we are not necessarily authorities on. I will not claim to be an authority on the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or anything like that. I am an American citizen. I read it. So this will be an opinion-laden thing, but at the same time, what we don't do, and I'm very proud of you about this, is that we don't get super political on our show.
By the way, and that's a great point. So before we dive into this, as you're listening to the show, don't send us hate mail, right? Don't send us, we send a lot of emails back and forth, a lot of text messages back and forth over the course of a week to talk about different show topics, right? And so, and it's always, and we try to keep each other, believe it or not, a little off kilter, because we want the shows to be interesting, we want them to be intriguing, we want you to walk away and say, that was helpful, that was informative, right? And this is the topic that came up, and you pitched it exactly that way. It does fill in the law, it checks the law box,
sure
right?
Does.
So we said, all right, well, we'll take a stab at it. It doesn't represent anybody's views but our own.
No.
And it's an opinion-laden piece, if you will, today. We can have all kinds of conversations, and if it makes you think, it makes you think. That's fine, but don't by any means, don't show up and pick at the office because you think you don't like the opinion.
As I do have some opinion. All right, so why don't we take a
quick break? Give everybody a chance to either turn the radio off, or fuel their coffee up, or get ready.
Right.
Get ready.
Yeah,
buckle in.
Yep. Hide your any weaponry that you may be carrying.
That's right. Put everything in the lockbox.
Armed, right?
That's right.
Make sure it's locked. And we'll be right back on Money in the Law, like big time.
Heavy, big law.
Yeah, big. Had the home run law today on My FM 101.3 WMRC and Holliston Cable Access TV. We will be back. Just don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
And you're back. Money in the Law, My FM 101.3. Jay Marsden, the Marsden Law Group. John Drohan, Main Effort Financial. Hey, real quick, what's your phone number over there at Main Effort? I always mean to ask you this on the radio, and I always forget.
My phone number?
Yes.
508-893-9990. It's like
Right.
it's like
Similar to mine, which is 508-858-5324. So in case anybody has any questions, they want to call the office, they want to talk
virtually
consult.
the same number.
Just bring it on in.
Listen.
We've talked about it. It could be the same number. We've talked about making it the same number.
Oh,
We've talked about it.
God.
Different show,
Don't-
different conversation, different show.
Tom did tell us not to talk about inside stuff, like inside, but put it this way.
Still
I've been
funny.
wanting to go into business with Jay from the beginning. And you know what? It's like the door is always open. It will always be open forever.
There was a funny
Yeah.
story real quick, and then we'll dive into the second man. There's a funny story about these two guys who were shopkeepers, and they worked together. Their stores were side by side, and every year, every day, every week, there was always a sale. One guy was trying to outdo the other one. One guy was trying to do the other one, and the signs were up, and it was, if you're doing a 10% discount, I'm doing a 15% discount. Drive business back and forth. So down the road, years go by, the two guys pass away, and they go in to clean up the stores, and what do they find in the back of the store? A door connecting both of the stores. The guys were brothers, and that was their shtick.
Yep.
That could be our thing.
That could be it,
Could be
right?
our thing,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Tunnel back and forth to the office. That's right.
An underground tunnel,
Yeah,
right?
that's
When they put the
Underground
sewer
tunnel
in.
to the gold
Yeah,
room.
that's
Yep,
right.
That's for all the money.
That's right.
Yep, we get down there at the end of
It's
the
like
week.
it's where we keep the whiskey barrels.
That's right. Count it all up. Yep. Hopefully full.
All right,
Soon
so we're
be
going to
empty.
talk about the Second Amendment today. Second Amendment is of course, we as American citizens, it gives us the right to bear arms. All
To
right?
bear arms.
The right to bear arms. So the whole idea behind the Second Amendment, of course, and this is in the wake of we just recently had at Holliston High School we had a Parkland shooting survivor came and talked. David Hegg is his
Hogg.
name.
Yeah, Hogg,
right. He came and spoke to the student body. And so there was that generated a lot of discussion, at our house, and I'm sure with everybody else about kind of the what's going on. Like this seems to be especially kind of in our in our children's lifetimes. They can it's almost like they see it. It's commonplace to them that there's these tragic shooting events, and it always kind of dovetails back to the Second Amendment.
Sure. Yeah. Always.
And so the conversation that we had was of course, and most people are either on one side or the other. They're like, hey, absolutely, why can't we make it be more like England? Why can't we make it more like Europe, where they have much stricter gun control, and then they don't have the same number. I mean, they still have tragedies like we do, but they don't have nearly the volume of things that happen in the United States. And then there's the other side, right?
Absolutely right.
And then the other side says, whoa, the framers of the Constitution, they specifically said, I have the right to defend myself. I have the right to bear arms. I have the right to, because there's bad people out there. Why, there's not always going to be, the government isn't always going to be able to protect me or protect my family.
Well, real concerns about tyranny, real concerns about getting out from underneath the boot of England, and there was a lot of issues around those types of of concerns.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I wanted to talk about how the Second Amendment is framed, and then I wanted to have some conversation. We can get your kind of view on what are the things that I think everybody needs to be aware of, and on both sides. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to just pick one side.
All right, pick a side.
All right, so let me. I'm going to read the Second Amendment as this is just the abridged version
as handcrafted.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
as handcrafted, right? So the Second Amendment of the Constitution is it reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All right. So, what do you when you read that? Like when you read that, and again, we'll give some of the history of kind of what's happened since then. But when you read that, what do you hear?
Well, it's funny. It depends on. I'll start off. The lawyer answer is it depends, right? It depends on your interpretation of the Constitution. Meaning, do you see the Constitution as written in the four corners of the document? What it says is what it says.
Sure.
That's all you can do. You're an originalist, right? You believe that the Constitution is not to be messed around with.
You're a purist.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. That's what you think. That was the position taken by the previous former Justice Antonin Scalia, who was a believer in What it says is what we can do, and those are the rules.
Right.
And then there's another position or another viewpoint, if you will, that the Constitution is a living, breathing document and that it's fluid to a certain extent and it's open to interpretation. And it's written with a degree of flexibility that the framers recognized. We don't understand this internet thing back in the day, right? We're all walking around with quill pens, right? We can go back to the Google concept. We can't even envision what that looks like. So we're going to build in a degree of flexibility here that allows people to interpret this the way they think it needs to be interpreted given the time.
Right. So the issue is that, you know, once that was, and that's a great answer, by the way, is once the Constitution's written, and the thing that people that the glaring piece of kind of the anti-Second Amendment people are the ones that say the word militia. They're like, whoa. This was written back in the day, like when James Madison was a slave owner and he was afraid that his slaves were going to revolt, right? He's like, hey, we need to have rights that everybody needs to be able to have guns just in case something happens, right?
Well, and the theory would be, we to have a well-regulated militia, right? And back then, that might have meant, hey, if you hear the church bell ringing 20 times in the town square, grab your gun from over the mantle of your fireplace and come on down because you're the militia, right?
That's right.
That's what you need. So you need to have that at the ready. And then for the reasons that you mentioned, protection, whether it's from people or other incidents. But there are some people who read into that and say, that's what that meant. That meant when we had to do that, right? This is what you need to. That's why you need to have that available.
So in case I do get called, I don't have to go down to the local town hall or wherever the town municipality and say, hey, okay, I'm ready. Can you give me my weapon now? I'm ready to go fight. They're like, well, we don't have anything for you. So that and probably largely that, if you kind of take a step back and really look at it, at least in my opinion, that's what it meant. It was built for that. Now, written into that is the idea of that you need to be able to, is the idea of that you have, it's a right. And this is where the argument comes. This is where kind of the argument comes from the side of people where they say, well, wait a minute, the Constitution is explicitly telling me this is one of my rights. This is a right I have.
Yeah.
And as an American,
specifically calling it out.
as an American, this is near and dear to my heart. Yep. This is because this is the whole reason why we left, why we decided to break away from the tyranny of the crown, and because we have rights. We have rights that are given to us by our government, that are provided to us, and I say, okay, hey, you know what? My right is it says right here, I have the right to bear arms. And the reason I have the right to bear arms, yep, it says because in case I'm in the militia, but that could mean a whole slew of things. It's really the right. I have the right to bear arms because I have the right to defend myself against.
Yeah, defend my person,
evil,
defend
right?
my property. That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. And the idea behind rights, and you mentioned a minute ago, and my con law days are a little bit behind me, but the idea is that the Constitution calls out specific rights, and then the Constitution has rights that we sort of interpret it to give. And that's where a lot of this comes from. And your comment earlier when you were reading the actual language of the right to bear arms, for folks who believe strongly in what they believe the Second Amendment gives them, that's really the foundation of their argument, which is the Constitution says I have the right to bear arms. And they basically say at that point, the argument is, in their mind, the argument is kind of over at that point, right? It's here, black and white, let's all read it, and there you go, right? Enough said. And that's the approach that folks will take when if that's their position, if you will.
Right, and you mentioned so that happened, and then the history shows us that after that was written, then as which much of the American government did, particularly the Supreme Court, they said, hey, this is on the states. Let's let the states kind of sort this out. We're not gonna make a federal decision on this until Antonin Scalia, 1980. So 1980 was the first time that the Supreme Court made a specific ruling on the Second Amendment.
And for folks who kind of wonder how that happens, generally speaking, you alluded to it, there'll be a series of lawsuits, right? Somebody will say, something will happen to somebody and they'll say, the government is somehow infringing upon my right to do X, right? That's what the Constitution is all about. Does the government step on your rights? And then they'll take that case to a court. The court will make a decision, yes, no, maybe. Oh, out it goes to another court. And at some point, there's disagreement among the lower courts that say, well, we see it this way, the other court sees it this way. And this is how stuff gets elevated up to the Supreme Court, to answer your question. And the Supreme Court says, okay, there's a compelling issue here that we need to settle because there's some discrepancy in the lower courts that we need to, as the highest court in the land, we need to figure it out. We got to sort this out for people and let everybody know what the rules are. That's how it happens.
And what a lot of people don't realize is that up to that point, there were things, people were doing things differently in different places. So what a lot of people don't realize is in 1967, Governor Ronald Reagan, former President Ronald Reagan, was governor of California. He put a ban on the ability to carry on loaded weapons in cities.
Right.
So people didn't know that. People he said, "Hey, there's no reason for you to carry a loaded weapon. This is what the California state government said, and this is the law that they proposed to put forth
at that time."
At that time. So. And it wasn't so all of this had, and there was, there's countless other, like as Jay said, that there's countless other of these cases that came up. This, I deserve this right, and on many different places. And then it wasn't until 1980 when the Supreme Court said, yep, you do have the right to bear arms. That people do. They clearly define that people have the right to bear arms. Now, this was, like this is a monumental decision. But at this point, there was, again, it was left to a lot of interpretation as to, okay, well, what kind of arms, and then for that, the same President Reagan turned around, and when he was
he was no longer the governor, now he's the president.
When he's the president, right, and the Brady Bill, right. So President Reagan is attempted assassination. And in the wake of that comes the Brady Bill, which restricts gun, which restricts gun, a big restriction of gun possession and gun laws that has carried through till today. The whole idea of being able to have weapons and to be able to have a gun and to be able to bear arms still holds true, but then there's the interpretation of what kind of weapon, when can I have it, when can what level of weaponry should I be able to have, and this is where then brings the introduction of the NRA started in the 1930s, but this is when in the late 70s is when the NRA, because the NRA was just, they were part of, they weren't the NRA that we know today.
Right.
The NRA wasn't until the late 70s when they were like, when it was kind of like all the moderates kind of went away. And they're like, yeah, we don't feel like lobbying anymore. And then it was kind of taken over by much more conservative, much more Second Amendment.
Well, potentially, and again, my history of the NRA might not be yours as you had done it and sort of lining up for the show. But at some point, people kind of say we think the issue is kind of settled, right?
Yeah.
Like we think everybody kind of knows the rules, right? We've you have a gun, fine, that's great. It doesn't get into anything. And then as we talked about, and then something happens, right? Something happens, and somebody says, my rights are being affected and I'm going to bring this lawsuit, and then somebody has to take the other side of that lawsuit. And this is how the nuances of what you just mentioned, which is, well, is it the right to bear arms? Okay, it's a right to bear arms. And then what will happen is somebody will go out and buy a gun, and somebody will go out and try to buy another type of gun.
Right.
And then the state steps in and says, or the government steps in and says, well, you can't buy that gun. And then somebody goes, whoa, back to,
wait a minute.
It all goes back to the original. It says bear arms. It doesn't say the right to bear a specific type of arm. It says arms. And then here goes and off to the lawsuit we go. And here's how we figure out, well, let's discuss it. Let's talk about the language. Let's talk about the legislative intent. Let's talk about and this is how all these nuances of something like you just mentioned, where something happens, right? The Brady Bill, everybody sees that assassination play out on national television, in many cases in real time.
Yep.
And then you hear about it afterwards. And then somebody like Jim Brady and the impact on Jim Brady plays out plays out for all the right reasons in the press, and he becomes an advocate for something, and people's temperament changes around certain events like this.
That's right.
And then there's a movement to say, okay, you know what, maybe maybe going down a different direction or putting different things in place makes sense. And then time goes on and people's perception, temperament changes. And to your point, the people advocating for certain positions change.
So here we are, in 2019, and the ruling still stands. There is everyone in our country, provided that you meet a certain minimal screening level, you have the ability and have the right to purchase and own and operate a firearm.
Yep.
Right. You were allowed to do that. And then, so now the question is, again, in wake of, you forget about them, and the ones that have happened within the last, between 5 and 10 years of these like incredibly tragic mass shootings that happen in Las Vegas, that happen in Orlando, that happen in Florida, that happen in Connecticut, and now it's like, well, how can we as a country fix this? How can we as a country prevent this from happening? And it all comes back to, well, they all used a gun, right? They all use.
There's a lot of opinions as to what's the driving cause behind those incidents.
That's right, and there's a lot of opinions, and you can come at it from like Jay said, like dozens of different angles as to why this person did this, why did that person did it. But the common denominator, for simple terms, is that they all used a gun. They all used, now whether the gun was illegally purchased or legally purchased, many of them were legal. It's not that they were stolen from an armory or anything like that, but they were legally purchased. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about kind of where we are now and kind of what the temperament is of, again, in wake of this thing that happened and of the conversation that happened in Holliston High, and moving forward in what people are saying now. So we'll talk about that when we get back on MyFM 101.3.
Yeah, all right.
Money in the law, which is a serious topic today, but thanks for staying with us, and we'll be right back.
We're back, MyFM 101.3, Jay Marsden, Marsden Law Group, John Drohan, Main Effort Financial. Sitting here, Christian Man in the Con. A little bit of a different type of topic today, a little heavier item. Driven obviously by the talk that you just had at the Holliston High School about the tragic shooting down at Parkland. They had somebody who was a survivor of the Parkland shooting come out. Obviously, I know there's been not just discussion around the actual fact that there was this topic or was this discussion. There also has been some pushback or some feedback, I should say, not pushback, around the appropriateness of the topic and whether or not the issue is a little bit too political, if you will.
Right, politically kind of driven for one side or the other. And that's an important topic, right? It's an important thing.
Well,
to
actually,
consider.
I think you're exactly right. I think I think as part of the discussion, if you're going to have a discussion around guns and the Second Amendment with your kids, I think a part of that conversation certainly could be, by the way, you guys as the end user audience, how do you feel about somebody coming in and talking about that with you? Because there may be folks in that audience that have grown up in a very, and I'm not saying this, please don't read into anything we're saying. We're just having a conversation, but who may have grown up in a very pro-gun household, right?
Sure.
And they say, look, my dad's a hunter, I'm a hunter, we go away for the weekend, we hunt. It's all about, guns are part of who we are. We've made them, my dad has great memories, or my family has great memories of the time they spent hunting with their family, and that's their approach, and other people go to the gun range. And so, there's a lot of kids in that audience that come at this from a lot of different ways. And so certainly sensitive to the idea that someone's going to come in, potentially bring a political message with them. So I think that the answer is not to say, don't bring the political message. I think the answer is, let's use this to foster a dialogue and have a conversation with them.
That's right.
So you can really speak to it intelligently. And that's one of the things I'll admit, that as my kids have grown up, I cherish the opportunity to have these higher level conversations with them, because I'll say this, and I don't mean it to sound dismissive of the kids, but these guys take in a lot more than we realize they take in. And you see them as your kids, but they're young adults. They have their own opinions. They're able to process information, and that's our job to help them do that.
And they have access to much more information than we had
Absolutely.
at that age. So that's really the big thing, is that with in the wake of the internet and computers and social media, that our kids we saw what our parents saw. We saw essentially we saw the news.
Well,
we
you
read
saw what
the-
your parents wanted you to see.
Right.
How about that?
Right. We
You know?
saw the news. We read the paper. And then maybe, you know, when we went to school, somebody would tell me, you know, talk about a different paper they read or a different program, and that was it. That was our exposure to it. Other than, you know, kind of human interaction. Where now it's, you know, everything's coming at you through in a fire hose, and so.
Got to sort it out. Got to help sort it out.
When you know, in the conversation, so that I too am sensitive to that as well. So I think from a political standpoint, again, without kind of, you know, this is my opinion and my opinion is right. You know, I'm sensitive to everybody's opinion, and I think in the holistic view of politics and the holistic view of kind of, you know, this person has this difference of opinions. I like to think of America as the place that allows everybody to do that. So even though there's somebody who may have a very distinct, different opinion than I have, that's part of it. You know, and in the military, you know, so as when I was in the military, you know, there was a lot of people that would be like, hey, you know, like the whole flag burning. Flag burning was a big thing in Vietnam. They'd burn flags, you know, in protest of the Vietnam War. And, you know, one of the, you know, our standard tagline was that, look, the reason that someone, you know, the military fights and dies, you know, on, you know, America's battlefields in order to allow you the right to burn that flag.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And your right to burn that flag is just as important as, you know, as your right to have protection against, you know, foreign invasion
Agents,
or things
whatever.
like
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when people are looking at this, you know, particularly the Second Amendment issue, then, like I said, there's people that are going to be on very far sides of, you know, very opposite sides of the fence, and, you know, we saw that in this, you know, kind of some of the feedback from the Holliston High discussion is that, like you said, there's kids who are like, hey, you know what, I'm pro guns, I'm pro Second Amendment,
yeah.
I believe in that, and so when I look at that, I say, well, you know, if I put myself in a position, and this is what I was having the conversation with my daughter, I'm like, look, we don't have guns in our house. You know, this is the choice that we made. You know, I'm not. I was in the military, but I'm not a gun guy. I like guns.
Right.
Shooting guns is fun. I enjoyed it. I did it for many, many, many years. But, you know, the idea of, like, you know, I'm just not. That's not what I want to do. Right. I'll spend my money on other things, but that's not now. If I had somebody break into my house, and I said this to my daughter, I go, if someone was breaking into the house and they had a gun, and I had, you know, I have 3 daughters and a wife and a dog, I'll wish I had a gun at that point, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
A gun would come in handy and able to defend that. Now, that being said, there are people who have had their homes broken into.
Right.
There are people who have had, you know, violent attacks, like, you know, that have been victims of, and they're like, hey, you know, why can't I defend myself? So when we look at, like, kind of the all sides, it's important to understand that people come at it from a different side,
Sure.
or they could be, or maybe they didn't have any event, but they've grown up in a household or in a family or in an environment where that guns and gun safety and it was part of their life.
That's right. It's part of their childhood, like every other aspect of the childhood. There's a healthy respect for guns. There's a respect for what guns do, and like you said, it's part of growing up for them, and that's, you know, we all have pieces of our childhood that are different from everybody else's, and there's certain things that you know that you grew up with that I didn't grow up with, and vice versa. And if guns are part of it, then that's great. If that's part of your culture, and that's great, and that's part of what you have great memories of, go to it.
So that's it, and you know, there's that opinion, and then there's the opinion of the people that are like, why on earth do we need guns? Because there's guns, because the access, the ability to purchase guns or for people to get guns is so prevalent in the United States, then this is why these things can happen. This is why these tragedies can happen. It enables these things to happen, and that's the argument. That's kind of the blanket argument. Like, if there were a greater restriction on guns or in the United States, then these things wouldn't be as prevalent, or
Right.
it would be harder for those things to happen. And it's a very strong argument. It's a very good argument in the sense that, well, you're right. If it's hard to get a gun, then maybe somebody doesn't have the ability to do what they did. If it's hard to get an assault rifle, if it's hard to get an AR-15, if it's hard to get an Uzi, or if it's
Sure.
or if it's hard to purchase the ammunition for these, or the ability to kind of configure these weapons to be able to shoot automatic and rapid fire, you wouldn't have like a guy in Las Vegas shooting into a crowd until he runs out of bullets, right?
Well, I think the challenge is from a policy perspective. I think the challenge is, how do you take that documentation, right? How do you take that evidence? How do you take, whether it's a study or whether you're looking at how other countries have addressed the situation, and I'm an evidence guy, right? I'm a data guy, and I want to see all the evidence. I want to see everything that can be provided to me to then help make an informed decision. And the informed decision doesn't have to be to one extreme or the other. It just could be what does all of this data tell us about, and we do it, by the way, in every other industry, right?
Yeah.
To your point, right? We do it in every other industry. At some point, somebody sat down and said, you know what? Seatbelts, using them does this, right? And airbags, well, guess what? They help do this. Or anti-lock brakes, they help do this. Get down the list of things, right? Stop smoking does this,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yes, there to some degree there's a cause and effect. And so at some point, if you treat the data the same, then if everybody can kind of agree, and this is part of the problem, right? If everybody can agree what the data says, right, that this means that, then potentially there could be that next step, which is what you're talking about, which is now can there be a conversation that goes something like, now looking at all the data, having all the information, how do we translate this data into action that helps improves the life of everybody,
right,
or makes some improvement or makes some movement forward so that we can reduce the problems that this issue has created.
Right, and that's, and you hit the nail on that. That's the key is there's got to be a common ground, right? There's got to be a place where we say, okay, do you agree that school shootings are bad, right? Like
Sure.
something. I mean, obviously that's ridiculous. But
yeah, it is. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
It's so simplistic, but it's true, right? So everybody, it's hard to not agree with that. I mean, and if someone doesn't agree with that, then they have arguably much different issues than what you're talking about.
Well, but this discussion always breaks down along the lines of, and it's an overused phrase, especially these days, but the phrase goes something like, you're entitled to your own opinion, you're not entitled to your own facts.
That's right.
So let's unpackage what the facts are, right? And then let's figure out where the opinions are, but we have to all agree on the facts.
That's right. And so when the argument, and so if the facts generate and the facts generate that, look, there's this is of all these tragic gun related deaths, how many of these were obtained? How many of these guns were used in, were legally purchased guns that were found or found, bought by the person or acquired from because they, somebody lent them to it or they were stolen from the person, whatever it was. That if the fact is that these guns were purchased legally in the United States, then that drives the conversation of, okay, well, how do there's got to be a way to make that harder, or to make that more, to be more accountable. And that's the argument, is that how do we make the purchase of guns more accountable so they don't fall into the hands of people who potentially could use them for harm.
Right. Well, at the same time, right, starting off the show, right, at the same time, respecting everybody's constitutional right to bear arms, right? To have a gun. So, and this is, you hear this all the time when these discussions come up. These discussions come up around, to your point from earlier, right? Let's define bear arms, right? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a handgun? Are we talking about an AR-15? Are we talking about something that's automatic, semi-automatic? What restrictions are reasonable? What restrictions can people live with? What restrictions are people willing to compromise on? And how do you sort of walk through that process of, this is what we all agree on? And again, some of that's opinion, because they don't give you a lot of detail here, right? Because we talked about at the beginning of the show, the framers couldn't envision that the musket that they hold right now, that's a
front-loaded musket, yeah,
powder bag ball, that whole thing. It takes them, they can get off 6 shots in an hour. In an hour if they're really good, right? If they really bring their A game,
yeah.
Versus obviously what the mechanization of that whole industry has brought and what it's done. And so Yeah, are they able to see those advancements? No. Do we believe that they were trying to build in some flexibility to allow us to address that? That's another part of this discussion,
that's the
right?
interpretation, right?
Where are you coming at this from? Where are you coming at this from?
So the idea of the Constitution saying that we have the right to bear arms is it's real. It's the law. And I think what's going to happen, and the word is the word, and I think this is the word not only that's to be used in this discussion, but in all discussions where you have, particularly it's seeming like in today's day and age where there's division, significant clear division of opinion, is the idea of compromise. And it's the idea of because what's not going to happen, at least in my opinion, what is not going to happen is not you're going to pass a law tomorrow and then it's going to say no one has the right to bear arms.
Sure.
Yep, that's not going to happen,
no,
because that's not how America works. America doesn't change things overnight or change things in such a dramatic fashion where it's red one day and it's blue the next day. You talk about this all the time, and they talk when you go to law school, they talk about this. There's a reason that these things sort of take a long time to kind of unfold, right? Because nobody wants that type of herky-jerky reaction to you wake up one day and the law says you do this, and you wake up tomorrow and the law says something that's the complete opposite, right? There's a reason it moves at a glacial pace, right? It moves slow because there's a lot of things not everybody
to consider.
agrees.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And by the way, not everybody agrees for all the right reasons, right? Yep. Everybody's obviously entitled to their opinion. Everybody's going to interpret things differently. You come to the reading of these things from completely different life world views, and I understand it. You understand it. I have friends that are real big gun advocates. I get it. We have a conversation. I respect their opinion. I understand where they're coming from. I completely know what they're talking about. And then they ask me my opinion. I go, look, I'll give you my opinion. It's kind of, that my approach is different than your approach. I'm not saying your approach is better. I'm not saying my approach is better. I'm saying we have different approaches for different reasons. Right.
It's cool that we can. It's cool that we have different, because our country allows us to do that. And there's no, it's not, we can have difference of opinions. However, it's the idea of if the data is supporting that there's something that needs to be corrected, there's something that we can do better, there's something that we can do to make things safer, to reach that common ground that that mass shootings or any type of shooting where a gun falls into the hands of somebody who is willing and has potential to do harm to other people, if that can be changed, if that can be restricted, if that can be affected to such a way where the danger is less, then that's where everybody needs to strive for.
The gold standard is everybody agrees, right? The gold standard is everybody agrees and says, you know what? Maybe the great lawyer word that you always hear is reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. If we all agree that there's a reasonable approach and we can make some reasonable changes that respects everybody's rights, your right to bear arms, your right to have a gun, the right of people who are not necessarily of the same mindset to not feel like that your rights are stepping on their rights. I mean, that's what this whole thing is all about. That's a great opportunity if people can pull it together.
Right.
Given the polarization around just what goes on in general today, and then around this issue on top of it, do we ever get there? I don't know. We've talked about it on the show before with some other issues, and this happens. I mean, this happens around a lot of things. This happens around things like the tax code. Sure. This happens around things like entitlement spending. This happens around things like international aid, and how much, what should the government be doing, right? How involved do you want your government? How involved do you not want your government? Mm-hmm. And this is one of those things that I think it's a heavy lift because people really are very passionate and very locked in on how they feel.
And so the argument from both sides is that, well, if I just compromise, then it's not good enough, right? It's not, if I say, okay, well, if let's say I'm a gun advocate and I have to go through, instead of taking 10 days for me, it takes 6 months.
Right.
And the screening process, and maybe there's an annual re-registration or something that right now, if I had to put up with this, it would be such a pain and I would be so inconvenient.
Well, and the argument would be it's trampling on my constitutional rights.
And they right, you're saying so now. So that said, right, and then on the other side they'll be like, well, wait a minute, but still, then somebody could still get access to that weapon. Somebody, that person who says that person, so they pass the screening test. Who's doing the screening test? What is the ramification of the screening test? How in depth is it? So that argument there too, right? Yep. So then like, well, that's not convenient for me. That's not enough.
Right.
That's not enough. And you go back to the example. So in the wake of September 11th, right? So remember what it was like getting on an airplane before September 11th,
it was
right?
A walk in the park.
It was. I mean, how many times did you run through screening, run through, get to the airport?
Oh, remember the Delta shuttle days? I mean, it was like literally jumping on the green line, right? You come sailing down the hallway at Logan because you were just 2 seconds out from the Delta shuttle flying, and those doors were getting ready to close. And they're like, yeah, come on. On you went, gone. No checks, nothing. You were on, done, gone.
So I use that example just because to me that seems clear to me, and so now it's different. Now you surrender some constitutional rights that you had before because they're where you can be searched at any time. You can and the security level has stepped up for across the world in the wake of September 11th. And although some people, it's inconvenient, they're like, ugh, this is such a pain. My traveling, the cost or the time cost of
really
travel,
infringing on my airport freedom. Yeah.
Well, it's changed, and in some respects, it's a legitimate argument, but that's the way it is, and the kind of the common compromise on it is that now the security is different because we don't want to have another incident like what happened on September 11th. And does that mean that something like that couldn't happen again? Nope, it doesn't mean that. It's not a perfect system,
no, 100%.
right?
No,
it's
that's
not
right.
a perfect system. But I think we're 18 years later in post September 11th. I think we can all agree that airline safety it's better.
It's better, and everybody feels better about it.
It's better.
Everyone's adjusted accordingly.
That's right. And so and again, if we'll leave it with this, is that if we can somehow recognize that something has to be done, that there has to be some kind of that something has to be done based on the data, based on the facts that are laid out. Then hopefully there'll be a compromise that will eventually lead to it being safer with respect to guns and with respect to the right to bear arms and still maintain some semblance of the spirit of the Constitution.
Sure.
And
protect your rights and absolutely
and have the America be a better place.
Wow. All right.
There we go.
By the way, all these opinions, these are not any opinions of my FM 101.3. These opinions belong to, these are just a conversation that John and I haven't. Nobody who has mentioned or talked about or joked about or nobody subscribes to any of these. This is not
That's why I bring a lawyer around. Yep.
It's just, here's your disclaimer. This is John and myself just kicking around an idea. That's all. That's all it is. So don't, again, everybody, if you're uncomfortable with the conversation, apologies. There you go. All right.
So, and you can reach us on moneyinthelaw.net, and we can talk
Find
about
us.
it some
Happy
more.
to have the
That's
conversation.
Right.
Always.
And if you want to invite us to a barbecue, and you have some beer available, we can talk
all day
about
long.
that
all day long.
All right.
We got to jump.
We'll see everybody next week. My FM 101.3, Money and the Law. He's the law. Jay Marsden. I'm John Drohan, Main Effort Financial.
We'll lighten it up next week for you.
Yeah. Well, no. This is fun. This is good.
All right.
This is important.
All right. Good. Actually, I'm away next week. We'll figure it out.
We'll talk.
We'll talk later.
All right.
Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.